So we begin with the fourth public meeting of the AI General Assembly first session. The executive board is prepared for the sessions with the delegates. Uh, Now, in this session, in this first session, public meeting 4, we will be discussing the remaining agenda, sub-agendas within the second agenda. So we will be discussing now the following. We will be discussing private ownership and control, ethics and strategy considerations in space politics, as proposed by Mr. Manuel Goffey. And the same motion has been already passed with a majority, absolute majority, by all. Therefore, let us go ahead with this. Uh, so we have to initiate further. It is humbly requested that for whatever reason the delegates should not leave the sessions, because first of all, it is of no consideration. I completely understand network issues, but try to fix them as soon as possible. This was already intimated long back, so it is at least a matter of responsibility. However, anyways, we understand your situation, but this is just a simple suggestive recommendation. Okay, so I would request Mr. Dev to go ahead. However, he does have a question, so please ask.
Yeah, I have to now go ahead with the ethics and the strategy concerns in space policies, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So
So,
you
should
will
I
be the
begin?
first. I will instruct further. So you will be
Okay,
the first speaker. After this, we will discuss the next agenda, sub-agenda. We need to do it fast because by 4 you need to propose the report. Okay, like every day, by 4:10 at least. Because now yesterday we had to go for the tracks, so we did not have time. Today, what we will do is we will actually point out specific issues and pointers, and then we'll discuss this. Okay. So the president has given us specific instructions that the report must be discussed. Um, Today, what we will do is that we will actually not go ahead with the executive summary, because we currently do not have any specific intent, and that's the thing. So this is also an important aspect. So let us discuss things further, and let us begin accordingly. So Dev, you have 5 minutes. Kshitij and Aditi, please handle from here and call out the delegates one by one and handle the timer. Thank you so much.
okay. Can I begin? Am I audible?
Yes, you can begin.
Okay. Just give me 1 minute. Yeah. Now, the possibility of creating thinking machines raises a lot of ethical issues, perhaps a host of ethical issues. Now, these questions can be pertaining to both ensuring that such machines do not harm humans and they are whether morally relevant beings and whether they apt to the moral status of the machines themselves. Now, I would like to talk about how ethics, play a major role in artificial intelligence and machine learning when it comes to observing data, Earth observation data. Now, artificial intelligence and machine learning is something which can enable users to analyze a number of Earth observation data in a very fast and an efficient manner with appropriate observations and convolutional neural networks used in order to automate image recognition, and these could be based on remotely sensed imagery. Now, as a result, Earth observation data may be analyzed in real time, minimizing the time and efforts which are required of human analysts. Now, consider this, understand this, that since these technological developments are coming into operation, are coming into force, however, and this is due to the ability of cloud services which can archive large satellite generated data sets and provide the computing facilities to process them. However, there is nothing. I would like to elucidate more upon the Indian prospects here. Now, India has not developed any law as such with regards to the protection of space data. So when it comes to storing large scale global data sets, which include Earth observation applications and Earth observation systems, all of these data and computing facilities to process them are with organizations which are not based in India. So the so these could be deemed to be regarded as certain hindrances or certain privacy concerns which could arise here, because machine learning models are only as good as the data for which they're trained on, and the quality of the data can determine the suitability of the model, which can be accurate and robust. However, not a lot of companies in India, in fact, not a lot of organizations have developed something which can track these observation applications, and they can track the movements of let's say agricultural movements or let's say other movements. So what I'm trying to say here is that the in future, if the satellite positioning technology is developed, then India as a nation needs to do something in order to uh, be capable of monitoring the global wireless spectrum. And now these technologies are changing at a very fast pace. So the lack of awareness concerning the benefits of space technologies can prevent countries from harnessing such technology. And I believe that is exactly what India is doing. They are not properly harnessing such technologies, and that is why they are behind, because there's only one organization in India, that is the ISRO, which looks after the space activities and the regulation of these space activities. However, the use of space related technology requires certain agencies or space programs which have funds. Now, these organizations need to be set up in a country like India, which is a developing nation. And I believe since there are there's no proper law, there's no proper domestic law in place, there could be a lot of ethical concerns with regards to the use of this data and with regards to how this data could be used by other countries who have the resources and who have the technology to access this data. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dave. I would now request Mr. Emmanuel Buffett to speak next. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. We're talking about this, privatization of autonomous and augmented system in space and conflict. So obviously, any technology, may it be, the smallest technology and the biggest one today with autonomous system, raises a lot of questions and ethical concerns that we really have to address. I would definitely say two things. First of all, ethical concerns must not, and this is much more of a call than a statement, must not be only done by Western countries. I do think like countries like India do have a say in those ethical assessment of autonomous system privatization and military weapons that will be used, that are already used on the battlefield. I do think that so far, and this is something that I really find concerning, is that all the ethical assessment of AI and autonomous system and these new technologies is made through the almost unique lens of Western countries. I'm really eager to know what Indian people can bring on the table through their wisdom, their culture, their religions, their ideas, their perspective, their historical perspective on that. And I'm really eager to see what all other countries and all the wisdoms and culture could bring to the debate. So my point here is to say that we really have to address all those issues without, because I've heard that too many times, without just saying that it is sci-fi, it will never happen, autonomy is not something that will happen in the near future. That's not the point. The point is that we have to think about our responsibility towards the future. And even if the probability that autonomous system, and I mean fully autonomous system, I mean systems that are able to make decisions by themselves, especially in the battlefield or in terms of lethality. If even if the probability is really low, we have to address that from now. We must not. We cannot afford just saying that it's sci-fi and it will never happen. That would be fully irresponsible. So the first thing is, once again, we have to have a broader view of the ethical aspect and the ethical concerns on autonomous system, may it be civilian or military ones, bringing on the table, around the table, other cultures, other wisdoms, other perspectives than the one that we have here in the West. If you look at the ethics codes that have been developed in AI, for example, you will find that it's really striking. They all look like each other, using the same sentences, the same wording, the same ideas, trustworthiness, explainability, transparency, this kind of things. These are mere words. There is nothing behind that. But the point is that I'd like to know what people from Africa are thinking about AI ethics. I'd like to know what Indian people are thinking about AI ethics. I'd like to understand what Chinese people understand in AI ethics, right? Because I do feel like we've been talking about biases a lot, gender biases, skin color biases, but there is a strong and huge bias in AI and autonomous system and all that technologies, which is the fact that we all read that through the ethical lens of the West, which is not the only one that exists around the world, right? And it's something like I do believe should be addressed from now. Thank you.
Uh, Thanks for that, Mr. Emmanuel. And we do really have a responsibility towards the future. Uh, Ms. Kashvi Shetty, you can speak next. You have 5 minutes.
Yes. So, talking about ethics, when we come to autonomous systems, obviously, because autonomous systems, the amount of technology that it brings in and the benefits that it also has its challenges. Where we, giving so much power to systems, there can be places where it is intrusive or where it creates more obstructions than it does benefits. So, I would like to talk about one of the issues that we could have with such autonomous systems is the issue of electronic surveillance. So, this is a great threat of intrusion and misuse of data. There is no legislation or regulation governing the space law, and that says that how, not only in autonomous systems but any systems that gather these data, how this data is used or how is this data regulated. Now, having surveillance can be something which is highly intrusive, and considering that now even private entities are something that some are there in space, and they will be the future in space law, then how do we deal with these ethical concerns? Because private entities, however idealistic we do feel, that we will say that they should adhere by certain standards, but profit intentions and having a competitive advantage will in turn lead to having taking such surveillance measures, using the data for their own need, catering to their interests, and that will lead to breach of privacy, and the rights of individuals will be harmed. So that's why there has to be a proper accountability mechanism, and a mechanism to see that the data that is used, and any mechanism that is built has to be built on these preliminary grounds of ethics, of the human rights of people should be maintained. So for this, the countries will have to come together and will have to make certain decisions as a whole. And having said that, I like Mr. Goffey said that it doesn't only have to be about Western values, about ethics and Western guidelines. It has to be about a more collective thinking of the states, a more collective thinking about the nations and about different nations and different ideologies. And like what I feel, this would be a possibility if suppose that nations do come up with bilateral agreements, they do support each other in bilateral agreements, where we can see that how their ideas are coming up, and they are supporting the ethical values and promoting this right practices, promoting the best practices that for that promote their nations as well as with other nations. And these bilateral agreements can further lead to a certain norms that are there for space law, and then we can see, a more like multilateral approach to this. Like, if you take the example, the Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organization. This organization supports satellite developments. It trains students in academics, supports development of radiometric calibration capabilities of their member countries of the organizations, and even develops small satellites through, their programs. So through this and also through these bilateral agreements, something can be promoted is the public private partnerships, which is something that is definitely needed for an economic perspective, as well as something that, the public, maybe the states could govern these entities even better. Another essential like problem, I think, when we see from an ethical standpoint, will be artificial pricing and destabilization practices. And this is something that we can definitely say that with private entities entering space law, this would be a problem that, for to prevent, for their commercial interests, such things will be taken. Now, for having to settle these things, or even if surveillance or any of such issues, states will have to take a step ahead. States will have to have national laws that are strong enough to curtail such practices. Not saying that make specific laws for space law, but probably even the competition rules, the competition guidelines that a nation has, it has to have a certain accountability for even activities that are carried on in space. So I feel competition rules and competition guidelines will definitely be one more thing that will have to be taken care in the space law regime, considering that certain, so there is no, it's not a situation of a monopoly, but rather somewhere that, entities can work together and could work towards the larger good. And definitely states themselves also should not having, should not be like, should put up a good example precedent and set up like values for the same. And this, according to me, would, lead to the most efficient solution. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Kashvi. I would request Mr. Prakhar Prakash to speak next.
Hello, good afternoon. So, we are here discussing about ethics and strategy concerned in space politics. So, first of all, we will have to understand that what is ethics, what is morality, ethics and morality that we have been talking about. Like in 50s and 60s, there was a serious debate between Hart and Fuller. They tried to explore the relation between ethics and morality, and this debate even continues till now. So, as far as human beings are concerned, we are still evolving, and we will keep evolving the concept of ethics and morality. And if we are going to discuss about the ethics and morality related to space politics and related to AI maybe and related to robotics, the first concern should be whether these machines or these algorithms should be governed by our ethics, or there should be some different ethical standards altogether for them. And as far as space politics is concerned, there can be different ethical concerns, how do we value the space, in which way we are using it for humankind. Like we have already discussed, it as a common good. So how it is used for the development of the whole human race. Moving ahead, maybe if we keep on exploring space, we come across many microbials and extraterritorial living beings. So how should those be treated? And Regarding this, I would like to state it with an example. Like as far as the concept of development is concerned, it is different for the Western countries and it is different for the Eastern countries. So one cannot impose their own perspective of development to others. It might not work. Similarly, as far as the beings of other territories, other planets are concerned, are we going to govern them or treat them according to our ethical and moral standards? Will that be ethically correct? And suppose if we are living on earth, we have evolved, and this present situation is a result of very long evolution, and we have evolved in consonance with the nature. So we both, the human being, the other animals, the nature, the living and non-living beings, all are interrelated and have evolved together. But on the other hand, if we go to Mars and we colonize Mars, we are the intruders there. So how shall we treat that particular planet? How the ethical standards evolves there? Because as far as human beings are concerned, the values that we have right now is a result of very long evolution. Like in India, sati was legitimate and people accepted that a few centuries ago, but now it is not acceptable. Earlier slave trades was acceptable, but now it is not. Similarly, we will go on evolving, and uh, but as far as the other planets are concerned, we are the sudden intruders, and there is no previous linkages. So how can we set a standard for them? Uh, for example, there was recently Elon Musk sent a Tesla car in space. They were we human beings sent a car, but then there were many concerns about contaminating space with the microbes that might be attached to that car. So these are the concerns which we are seeing it with the human perspective. But what about the perspective of other beings, other planets, the other sides? Uh, like the And moreover, as we are thinking to go in space to colonize other planets, then the Earth does not remain the only home for human beings. So maybe this may also result in change of dynamics of ethics and morality for the earth. Maybe we are not so uh, eager to save the environment, or maybe the big companies, the rich people, the rich countries are not so much concerned about saving the environment of the earth, and rather they can concentrate on building a colony or staying there in the other planet. So all these goes on works together, and therefore the as the previous Kashfi has mentioned, that transparency, accountability, openness, all these are together should all these should together work to bring a transparent system where everything is open for everyone to be judged and to be decided. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Prakash. I would request Mr. Prantik Mukherjee to speak next, please.
Thank you, Shitesh. So, coming into AI ethics, coming to ethics and strategy concerns in space politics. So, first of all, we have to understand that, before coming up with a regulation or a policy, the ethics of ethics, I mean, which is actually soul of a policy should be maintained. So, even like we have seen that recently that Russia has uh, claimed Venus to be its to be a Russian planet. So here what is happening is that tomorrow that tomorrow war may be fought on fought on space with regard to land acquisition and claiming in outer space, and which is actually not a very good indication towards the international peace thing which United Nations has been long wanting. So in this regard, what we have done, what's the role of the United Nations is that United Nations have to make a try to convince all the countries to come up with a multilateral treaty to avoid any further illogical fighting over land or even claiming planets in the outer space. So I mean the problem is it's not a very recent problem. I mean this thing has been going on for like decades, and I mean we can witness like the space politics thing from the Cold War era. I mean it was very, like between US and Russia. So what and we are witnessing the result right now that increase of space debris and even we unregulated even like China has recently launched their launched their asteroid mining robot into space. And like it's if there is not a proper regulation, like uh, we are we are but what we are doing is like every country is acting on their own, and there's no regulation which will actually oversee and actually put for the restriction on doing such activity in the outer space. Because look, outer space is for everyone, right? So like country has an equal share in it. It's like the US cannot claim from like tomorrow that moon is ours, and Russia cannot claim that Venus is ours, and things will and then things will go on like that, which will nothing will happen, and it will only just result into a drastic war. And so what my point is right now is what my point is right now is like we have to all the countries have to see the ethics part very precisely, and they have to formulate a strategy so that these kind of things can be avoided in the outer space. And and so like whatever exists, or like even if there is any existing policy which is actually I guess there are some policies which are regulation policy and regulation, and even international treaties are there which are actually talking about it but we have to but the role of the United Nations here is that they should check that those regulations and policies are being followed by each and every country, and so that the international peace can be maintained among each country. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mukherjee. I would now request Mr. Samar Rajput to speak next, please.
Okay. So artificial intelligence in the space debris. So as we see that artificial intelligence involved in all the spaces around the world. So if we specifically talk about the outer space, now in that context, if artificial, so 20 years down the line, if the machines are so evolved, like if you are collecting a data, in order to you find a reliable data, you need to put a certain algorithms into the artificial intelligence, which we can relate to. So that particular data has been put by the human, correct? Now in order to relate to that particular data, we have to make a machine which is very relatable to ourselves in order to analyze the data very clearly. So if we give a human touch to the machine and we are sending such machine into the spaces, now the ethical issue which can be addressed in the space, because when there are astronauts in the space who were going for the space exploration, so there's an issue regarding their lives and everything about sending them into such hazardous situation or difficult situation. Similarly, down the line, 20 years down the line, what if these robotics which were helping these astronauts in the outer space going through the spaces? So essentially the point of ethics is that what were the rights of that particular robot is, because now it has a human involvement or a human characteristics while collecting our data. So where are we drawing a line while sending a particular machine into the environment which has a capability of a human collectivity? So there's right now there are no such rights which were available for the robotics as per se in any jurisdiction to give specific rights to the robots. So in this space, how in suppose in the environment where the astronaut and a robot are existing in the same environment. So how are the treatment of a machine is going on? So such ethical issues can be seen. So we have to also address this part of it as well. Uh, Additionally, there's another aspect to it, that suppose if a machines like in previous session, it has been said by, I think, Pratnik or Dev, that uh, that AI has replaced in certain law firms for the research assistant, right? So in a similar circumstance, in the outer space or in the space stations on the Earth, so there's a lot of labor work which has been involved. What if the robotics has now reducing the work of a labor? So now the most of the work has been done by the machines and the robots now. So there's another issue, that how would you, there's a challenge of the employment for the labor work for the human, because now the most of the work has been done by the robots. So there's another ethical aspect to it, so how would you deal with that aspect as well? Other than this, how will you monitor the work of a robot? What were the regulation? We have to look into all of it with the course of a time. I think that would be all. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Summer. I would request Shruti Somya to speak next, please.
Hello. So space
Yes,
exploration. Hello, am I audible?
yes, you're audible, Shruti. Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So space exploration
Yes, you're audible.
is
Aditi,
a
if you
very
could please reset the timer. I'm sorry, Shruti.
okay. Okay, sure.
I'm sorry, Shruti, for that. Aditi, if you could please reset the timer. Yeah, please go ahead, Shruti.
Thank you. Space exploration is a very constantly progressing field, fulfilling the natural human curiosity about worlds other than our own. Exploration of a solar system and beyond is generally met with support by people from all walks of life. While the bulk of our effort is put into allowing both objects and humans to survive safely on other planets and moon, there is also a need to protect other environment from us. The potential. Okay, so I will be talking about basically two ethical aspects. One will be the contamination, and other will be the potential alien lives. So okay, so the potential contamination and destruction of other worlds and other life is both a practical and an ethical problem. The past decade has been a considerable shift in the volume and a quality of work on the space ethics. Ethical constraining is a part of any functioning society, and in the case of a liberal democratic societies, obviously so. It is tempting to, in some contexts like that of human activities in the space, to include such constraint only as side consideration, pushed out of the margins, and linked perhaps to the philosophical and the metaphysical commitment of a peculiar sort. Here we might think again about the theories of inherent values or about the ethics formed as an extension of some or other sets of religious commitment. Space ethics may be broken down or subdivided into multiple ways. For convenience, the subdivision appealed to here will be standard ethical consideration and special ethical consideration, with the later particularly but not like exclusively associated with the space. Issues of space safety, risk, and its disclosure belong within the standard ethical consideration. Uh, they apply equally to a broad range of other terrestrial human activities. By contrast, the ethics and of space ethics, and at least some consideration of planetary protection, such as the avoidance of further contamination, involves consideration which is peculiar to space, or at least to space, together with a relatively small amount of special terrestrial context. For the moment, I will simply assume that planetary protection, example, the matter such as the forward contamination, really is entangled with ethics, although this is an assumption which may seem more obvious to ethicists than to policy theorists or the developers of protocol. The entanglement of the space ethic is, by contrast, non-controversial. Now, there have been various organizations who are working to develop the guidelines and rule for preventing the former contamination, which obviously include the NASA's Office of Planetary Protection and the International Council of Science Committee on Space Research. But unfortunately, their guidelines are often based on outdated or the arbitrary theoretical values of the probability of contamination and damage to the alien environments and life. Additionally, it is impossible to completely sterilize the spacecraft leaving Earth. When human travel in those spacecraft, contamination is almost certain. Beyond contamination, ethical questions must be considered about the human intervention and research of the potential alien life. Clearly, the problem of planetary protection goes far beyond the simple prevention contamination. As space exploration allow us to travel farther from the Earth and explore more like outside it, we will need the policies and protocols to guide us and allow to learn more about the universe in an ethical way. Despite the difficulty of this task, it is essential that we have these discussions and that people from all walks of life and around the world have a voice in designing guidelines for space exploration. Somewhere between the extremes of exploring without care of contamination or other harm and stopping space exploration altogether, there might be a set of protocols which minimizes this destruction and allow us to continue to satisfy our curiosity and drive for the discovery. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Shruti. I would now request if any other delegates have any additional things to say, they will be provided with 3 minutes each. So, if any other delegates have anything else to add to their speeches, they can. Okay, all right. In that case, I think we can move towards the next sub agenda that had been passed during the last meeting, which is private ownership and control issues in space in autonomous and augmented systems in space. So I think we could go ahead. We could go ahead with the speeches, and Mr. Dev Tejani can start.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are, Mr. Dev. Please.
Okay, okay. So I'll just commence. Uh, so the agenda that we were talking about is private ownership and control issues in the space. Now, I would like to talk about the Indian aspect again. Now, India has been a prominent player in the commercial space race since the past few decades. Despite this, India still does not have a space law in place. In fact, extremely few countries, such as the United States of America, Luxembourg, and Japan, by far have been able to formulate their own national space laws. Clearly, the only legal instruments for space activities exist in international law. Now, the first international instrument which deals with the subject of space law is the 1967 Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of State in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, Outer Space Treaty. Subsequently, the 1968 Agreement on the Rescue of Astronauts and the Return of Astronauts and the Return of Objects Launched into Outer Space Rescue Agreement, the 1972 Convention on International Liability for Damage Caused by Space Objects, that is the Liability Convention, and there are a lot of other such conventions. Now, it is indeed undeniable that the expanding nature and unexplored possibilities in the field of space and space activities will create a lot of issues if orderly development of governance mechanisms does not occur. This is because in the near future, the private sector is going to play an extremely significant role in the development of the general space and commercial space activities, especially since the fourth industrial revolution, I'm sorry, will enable the large scale use of artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. It is true that space activities are constantly on the rise in India, along with simultaneous partnerships with the private sector as well as other nations in terms of space activities. Therefore, a domestic space law which is capable of embracing the distinctive intricacies needs to be developed And to elaborate, the current space law in India is a defective space law bill which was introduced. However, domestic legislations now, if developed, will have to cover sound principles of the public-private partnerships, the jurisdictional principles for space objects after launch, the liability of private players for violations, the liability of governments, keeping in mind the international relations that India and other nations have with each other. And further, I would like to elucidate upon how the global space market at present is valued at $350 billion, and India's share in it is only 2%. Now, the Polar satellite launch vehicle, which enabling 2-3 launches a year, is a testament to this fact that India is acclaimed for its cost-effective and reliable launches. However, with the growing reliance in space-based services in the last decade, the average number of launches per year are not sufficient to make India self-dependent in this sector. So, the emergence of private players in this sector and this industry rather has recently led the government to announce certain promises for the sector. As pleasing as the announcements like using ISRO facilities sound to the private entities, they somewhere fail to assure them of an impetus until they are concretized into legislation. Now, I would like to further talk about uh, how the IPR regime needs to also be made when private players enter into the market. So a strong IPR regime also needs to be made, and enormous funds and research are required for these activities in order to govern the private players. Now, the U.S. Space Activities Bill uh, specifically extends the applicability of patent law to prototypes which are developed for activities in the outer space. However, India currently doesn't have anything like this, and India needs to develop something, a law, a proper law, a solid, robust piece of legislation, and support the private entities, because this, I believe, could act as a motivation for private entities to step into this field. And the legislative policy should place importance on the issue of space debris and suggest methods for its prevention. Along with that, similar laws which are executed by only a few countries like the USA and the Luxembourg, even India needs to make provisions for new space activities in our legislation. Now, this will enable us to promote new entrants in the field, and new space resources, space utilization, space tourism, and new space activities in our legislation will also give confidence to investors to fund in these activities. So yes, that's what I would like to share from my this is what my perspective is. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that, Dave. That was really insightful. Mr. Emmanuel, if you could speak next.
Yes, for sure. Okay. I
I think we've lost Mr. Emmanuel, so we can wait for a couple of minutes or a minute. If he doesn't join, then we could move to the next. Okay, he's back. Okay.
Sorry, I lost the connection. Okay, so yeah, regarding this private ownership and control issue, obviously the big problem that we all have is that we're all seeing, and I think we all agree on the fact that we need an international legal framework that would be much more binding than the existing ones, and that would be accompanied with some sanction that would be much more efficient than they are so far. I have been concerned with the United Nations documents and all these legal documents that have been issued through the UN and other international bodies, because most of the time, and you know it, they're not applicable to the real world for many reasons, and especially because some of the countries that are really interested in space are the most powerful countries in the world, right? And it's really hard to make them abide by the rules and by the laws that they've signed, nonetheless. So the point is that so far we have regulations, we have lots of documents that could be used, but they're not used for diplomatic reason, for international relations reason. So if you had obviously the privatization of space to the equation, it makes those rules much more difficult to apply in the real world. We all know that those documents that have been issued by the UN are binding for the states. They're not always binding for private actors. So the big issue we have here is that private actors are investing the space. They're invading to some extent this global commons for vested interest without thinking of the interest of humankind. So I'm pretty pessimistic about the fact that we will be able at some point to have an efficient regulation for space ownership, and that we will be able to control what is going on out there, right? And I feel like if you had the fact that international relations, and this is a realist point of view, are mainly about struggles between big states. If you had to that the fact that private companies are really hard to control and hard to sanction when they violate the laws. If you had to that the fact that new technologies are annihilating any kind of borders, and that it's really hard now to control also this digital world. I feel, and I think it's really bad, but I feel like there is no efficient way to control. So obviously we can write legal documents as much as we want. At the very end, what will happen is that it will be the anarchy out there. I would definitely call for maybe something that would be outside of the UN, outside of the box, kind of a neutral body that would make decision for the sake of humanity and not for the sake of vested interest of states and private companies. That's totally idealistic. I know it because I know that it will never happen, but I think it's the only way to control this space ownership or this intrusion of private companies and maybe the use of space for bad purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Emmanuel. And I think it would be wonderful if there could be such an organization, that is not politically charged or that is not charged with some kind of interest. The next person to speak would be Kashvi Shetty, please.
Yes. Um, so talking about private ownership in space, it is definitely a thing which is very difficult to regulate and contentious in nature. But also, my position stands that it is something that is the way to go. Now we do need these private companies for exploring further and to doing good for the people too. Like this is private entities do help in like leveraging down costs and actually helping going places where first we couldn't, because there's always a limitation of costs of funding. So public private partnerships and this collaboration has made these new possibilities open. So like Mr. Dev has specified about India's position on it. Definitely India has also realized this concern, and ISRO has opened up to private entities, and allowing their sharing of their data and facilities is something that is a positive step. But at the same time, just like he said, that it is without certain guidelines there can be nothing that is sure about. So therefore there are actually certain guidelines, but at the same time an additional thing that could be done and that is would be required is the is public opinion. So for getting transparency, there has to be involvement of public opinion at stages. Obviously, like military projects or projects that are critical to nation security, no, for these projects there can be very limited that can be done. But for other projects which transparency can be maintained, if the states and if the private entities do have a dialogue and do communicate to the public as well with there's particular intentions, or this is the space, like this is the project, what this would do in turn is that this would legitimize their project. This would legitimize the concern, the need of the project in the time, and also to a certain extent build confidence and not use an incentive to the wrong doing. Secondly, like we stated before about the ethical concerns, the concerns that would come with privatization, I would not want to repeat that. So I just what the point of concern that will be very pressing in this case in private entities is liability, because I said earlier that states' responsibility is at most in this case in space law. So how would they attain who like liability in this case? So first of all, augmented system, autonomous systems, they are developed and operated by multiple people at multiple stages. So there needs to be a proper, well-framed liability structure. If there are agreements, well-framed liability clauses, also something that we could deal with or possibly could be a potential in future in agreements could be a joint liability framework. So what this would do is that it would provide a more viable solution where always you cannot attain liability on one person. But if a joint liability framework is something that can be done, this could save time in disputes. This could also save down on costs and could be something that must be considered by states or private entities. Secondly, another problem that would be there with these is the export guidelines. So, because obviously space objects or the requirements of space are such that cannot be done by a particular nation or particular entity. There is always interdependence. There is always trade amongst countries. So, how do we then regulate this international trade and export? So you like the United States already being a significant exporter of these space objects has guidelines relating to the space objects and their export. So if nations across the world do have such strong national policies for their export, this will not only cater to their own interest, but at the same time also create a practice and a code that could be followed and would only lead to good practices and probably a better mechanism to uh, for the future use of such space objects, for the future use of such autonomous systems. So yes, that would be my position for this sub agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kashvi. Uh, well, actually, it was nice. So I am back. Due to certain turbulence, I was not able to come back. Anyways, so I think we are discussing the sub agenda which is on private ownership and control issues. Well, actually, some very interesting points have been made by Kashmi. So let's go ahead. Any point of information to Kashmi by anybody? No? Okay. Let's go ahead with this. Aditya can manage the timer as it is. And let's go to Mr. Prakhar. So, Mr. Prakhar, you have 5 minutes. Aditya will start timer. So, please. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. So, we are dealing with private ownership and control of the space missions and space. Uh, as far as India is concerned, recently in 2020 itself, the government came up with a in space Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. As we have already discussed, that the private players needs to be incorporated in the space exploration and space domain. So I would just brief out what this organization is meant to do. So this will develop a level playing field for the private players who wants to come and explore in this field of space, which was earlier restricted to the public sector units. So, and here the private players will be able to use ISRO's infrastructure, satellites, scientific and technical resources, and even the data of space exploration to carry on their projects. And the ISRO chairman, KC1, has recently mentioned that ISRO needs to expand up to 10 times to cater the need of to cater the need of India, and to be able to build these resources, ISRO would like to concentrate more on research and development, to developing the new technologies, explorations, human space flights, and as it is largely presently it is largely involved in routine activities which delays the strategic objective of the ISRO, and therefore it would like in any other field government has taken itself out from the routine activities and is concentrated on the strategic developments only, and therefore the ISRO will also be doing the same, and it will be concentrating only on technologies, safety, securities, legal, and maybe promotion. Moreover, last year as well, because ISRO has been very successful with their PSLVs, and it is much cheaper option as compared to other nations. So it had Antarix as a public sector unit, and now it has NSIL, New Space India Limited, which will be focusing on marketing the technologies and the resources that ISRO have, so that it can have the financial resources and could focus on the on what is actually required. So this is the development in the field of private ownership in space technology. However, the concern is uh, when the privatization happens, initially it was considered to be when the concept of privatization came, it was considered that as people individually will own resources, they will take better care of it. But then as these resources becomes tradable, it changes ownership very frequently, and in that way and in this way the companies does not focus on a long term perspective, but a short term gain, and therefore and ultimately as these things are tradable, there will be only few big companies which will be having the hold of all the resources, and this will result in concentration of ownership, which needs to be checked through relevant competitive environment, and to check the monopoly. And like it like in And once the right gets concentrated, it becomes too easy for the companies to hijack the regulatory and the legislative processes over, and therefore a system of limits needs to be designed. Otherwise, it might lead to a overall slow destruction, because as already discussed that private players will be able to use the data of ISRO, the all the data that it has, and if these data, which is a result of decades of efforts of ISRO, comes to a private player who might not value it, and it might use it for sole profit objectives, that needs to be checked. However, as the ISRO chairman already told that it would help to it would like to help the companies to develop the technology, and it will guide them, handhold them, so that they can become better equipped, and and they may take care of the technologies that is robust, like managing the space launch vehicles, the organizations, the launch pads, etc. And thus both the private ownership and the control, as well as the public, may go hand in hand with both catering to different objectives of the space missions. Thank you.
Great. So we have Prantik, but before that, any point of information to Mr. Prakhar? No. Yes, Prantik, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Abhivardhan. So, since I've previously talked a little about this privatization thing, so what I say is that privatization may make the decision making process fragmented, and it may actually may diffuse it, and thereby and thereby may obscure the individual accountability. So since like India doesn't have any like like their solid law of their own to like to deal with privatization of space technologies and privatization of space, it mainly it largely depends upon the international treaties and the international conventions and all. So it will account. So if India tomorrow thinks of bringing up a new law and everything, so it will be a core challenge for the law and governance in this century to evolve new legal regimes and new liability, oversight and accountability mechanisms to respond to the radically changing pace of armed conflict and privatization. So, well, as we know, like this, so since like a private, since the privatization of space technologies have been allowed in India, so because of that, many new contractors and bidders are coming up, and they really want to work with ISRO and accomplished space projects and all. So sorry. So what I think is that like this private or non-state actor contractor made like they might not follow the international conventions and all because they might take an exception to it, and they can be like a conflict of law which which may happen. So if we take up a situation where if any of the private players does something out of the context or does act in a come up with something, does something criminal in nature. So the existing legal doctrine is not very much well equipped to cope up with this criminal responsibility in the case of this automated and outsourced technology. So what we have to do is like we have to come up with a solution, and we have to struggle structure the structure the regulation in such a manner that the liability part is also very much widely covered. So obviously when like here we can, so like if a like if a car like if a corporate is very much, if a corporate house is very much liable for any of the wrongdoing happening, then we can obviously put them under the corporate criminal liability thing, or like if tomorrow India brings a precise regulation with regard to space technologies and all, so that they might either held like it held the corporate response hold the corporate as a to be responsible, or any particular person who may have acted acted out of the box and did something. So I'm not very much against privatization, but because actually privatization is very much necessary to do some quality, like privatization brings quality control and all. But if privatization is not properly regulated, or if the owner of the privatization of ownership is not being very much regulated, then it might pose a lot of problem. And what I currently think is that right now is that since space is dealing with space technologies and dealing with space overall, it's a very complicated issue, and they should act in a very wisely manner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prantik. Let's go ahead with this. Summer, you have 5 minutes, but before that, any point of information to Prantik? No? Okay. Go ahead, Summer. You have 5 minutes.
Yes. So the previous delegates had covered
this in entirety. So I have nothing new to speak. So I waive my right to speak. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Means you will pass it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so we have, okay, 1 minute. We have Mr. Shubham. So, Shubham, first of all, welcome on the second day. Happy to have you actually. Um, so, first of all, we need to have your attendance. Okay. We
Yes,
will
sir.
need to get it done in a minute. So, first of
Yes,
all,
sir.
tell me if you will be present or present in voting. You cannot be absent since you are already there. So,
Yes, sir. Uh, Present and voting, sir.
thank you so much. Present in voting for day two. I hope I see you on day three also. So, please do
Yes,
come and we await you.
thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
please do come on day three and day four because
Yes,
the people who come on two, three, and four, or one, three, and four, or one, two, and
I
three
will
will
sure
only
arrive,
get
sir.
certificates, and
Yes, yes,
only
sir.
their membership will stay. Nobody else's because we are considering the review because we are considering that if members don't even attend. Obviously, there are exceptions for some people who have obviously tests and all that, but in general, no, we will not take any
Yes,
such a recommendation. So we will be the last speaker here. We have not even voted, but anyways, uh, what I would say is I have a question. So would you like to discuss in this debate, or would you like to go ahead with the next agenda, which we will discuss, and then you pass the motion, and then you come up with something?
sir, I would like to pass a motion on next step, further step.
Right. So when the next sub agenda gets passed, then you speak. Perfectly fine. So Shruti,
Yes,
you are
sir.
the last speaker. You have 5 minutes.
So, okay, so space activity has constantly been an administrative issue as it is something which was highly required by every individual and was never seen as a commercial and was never seen with a commercial point of view. However, recently we can see a move toward commercialization and inevitably toward the privatization of space activity. Lately, there has been numerous development in augmentation of space and conflict activity, both on national and international front. Government-led agencies have achieved amazing things since the moon landing, but one simply does not have the in-house capacity to address the country's growing requirement. The space sector and its requirement have grown enormously in the last decade to include television and broadband services, space science and exploration, space-based navigation, and of course defense and security application. Around 32 uh, states and two international organizations, including the ESA and UMSTAT, have registered space object with the United Nations. More than 30 states have their space program, and more than 450 states have procured the satellite in orbit. This is like clearly evident that there is a significant increase in the use of outer space. The SpaceX, was the first private enterprise which launched its first successful launch in the year 2019. This became a landmark moment for the private space sector. But not very back, Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin entered into the game of the private space sector. The privatization of space is, by all account, an extraordinary thought somewhat. Public funding isn't the way to genuine advancement. Real space exploration needs a development equipped for delivering income and benefits. This will require a private undertaking to venture outside the administrative agreement and assemble a space voguing revenue industry. The government has need the private sector can fulfill, and through those need is subsidizing the research and development those private entities need to do to develop their technologies to the point where they can affordably meet the appetites of the market. By providing money to the companies like SpaceX and Boeing to develop human rated spacecraft to ferry crew to and from ISS, we are helping them develop human related spacecraft and they can use to take the private playing individuals into the space. Now, it is extremely important not to go only with the advantages and get lost in that, but to see the future repercussions associated with it. Boosted with the cheaper launch prices and new microsatellite technologies, which has been seen devices shrink in the size of a loaf of a bread, companies are now launching more and more satellites into the space, and that has a consequence. The small area of space around the planet is becoming quite crowded, and the potential for damaging and expensive collision has increased. Monopoly is the second thing in the sector that cannot be hidden. Now, since private companies have entered, and in the coming year, even more will enter, there are high chances of monopoly in the business. It won't be surprising to see the powerful throwing other organization out of the business, which will eventually lead to other problems like increase of the cost. It is evident that in the upcoming year, there will be a lot of hustle in the space activity. With a greater number of private enterprises along with the government organization entering the space, it becomes necessary for the proper legislation which must be made by the government of the state and enact a national space legislation. The use of space by actors must be regulated. This is extremely important for the environmental protection of space. Some sort of traffic controllers for the space must be set up. Now, proper regulation must be made by the government for the private entities as well. These regulation must be in accordance with the international space law. Private organization must be adequately insured, and proper framework and jurisdiction are required to address the issues which are associated in the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So yes, this is the end of the discussion of this agenda, agenda, I would say. The last one, which
May
is
I,
to be voted
may,
in.
may I just ask a question to
The
Shruti,
point
please?
is, please, POI. Yes, sir. Yes.
Oh, yeah, just a question because Shruti, you were saying something that I also found in the explanation report, and which is that more than 450 states have proper satellites in orbit. And I'm just curious to understand what you mean by 450 states, knowing that the UN nation is only made of 193, recognizing 197, and there is no more than 200 states if you take into account microstates. So what are those 450 states you were talking about, please?
So you want to know the 450 states I was talking about?
Yes, because as far as I know, there's only, let's say, 200 states that are recognized in the world. So 450, I don't know what that means exactly.
Uh, I was talking of 450 states that have procured the satellites in the orbit. Am I wrong at this point? Because in a report only I saw this figure.
Yeah, but I think that's a wrong figure. There is no
Okay. So
That's a wrong
450
figure.
states.
Okay, I'll check with this
Yeah,
and get
okay.
back to you.
exactly. So
Okay.
Okay,
yes, it
sure.
can be a point of order, I must say, because 400. If you're saying state, then what is it? You're talking about regions. You're talking about nation states. Member countries under international law, or what? That's also a question. So it's fine. I think it
Okay,
is
okay.
then not. Maybe it can be something else, but it's
Okay, so
perfectly
I'll
fine. I
get
think it's a
back
point
to
of
that
order.
figure and I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Yes. No issues. Yeah, obviously, I think I must say 193 is the official figure as per the United Nations. Two which are not recognized are Palestine and the Holy See, which is the Vatican. Other than that, yes, there are some very small states also like Abkhazia, Tuvalu, and all that in Asia and Atlantic. But still, I think ideally it might be between 230 to 280. Still, not beyond that. It might be because 193 is just the UN figure. It is like the members currently in the United Nations, but it can be beyond 230 at least, but not beyond 280. I think so. Maybe the official figure is still undoubted because declaration issues. Some countries recognize, some countries don't recognize.
Okay,
Balfour
so I'll
Declaration
get
and all
back
that.
to that report
So
and
okay.
let you know.
Yes, the rectification is therefore necessary. I think Samir also needs this message. Anyways, our thesis much is the delegation. So let's begin. So we have to vote for the last one. Okay. Today there is no executive summary from the board because the president is not available. However, the executive board stands because of the session consultant. I hope that he will come tomorrow. He will do. The last one, which is to be discussed as sub agenda, is IP recognition and safety policies. So, who does wish to table the motion?
I would like to table the motion for IP recognition and safety policies.
Agreed. The motion is legit and accepted for the purpose of voting. Now, those who are in favor, please vote ayes. Those who are not, please vote noes. Please vote. And Kshitij, please mark them. 1:0. Everybody has to vote, including Thesis Shubham. Everybody. Should be 9:0 or something which adding is 9. You can't. You cannot avoid it. Yeah. Majority can be crossed. That's not an issue. The issue is people should vote. That's the moral of the story.
7:0.
3 plus 3 plus 1, 7.
8:0 for ayes.
One more person. There is no no's. Inter-ayes. The motion is passed. So now we are for the final session, for the final sub-agenda to discuss. Delegates, you have to discuss the report. I know you are working on it. I have had a look at it. Today we will discuss it in a reasonable manner. So I have a very urgent request. By 4:10 p.m. Indian Standard Time, please complete your speeches. Those who are interested will only speak. Okay. So that's how we will go ahead. So I need to confirm who will speak. Dave, you will speak, right?
Yes, I would like to speak.
Okay, Mr. Goffey, I hope you will speak. You will speak, I think so. Yes.
I hope so. Yes.
Okay, great. Kashvi, would you like to for this sub agenda?
Yes.
Okay, Prakhar,
Yes.
would you like to? Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Prantik and Samar, would you like to?
No, I won't. No.
Okay, exempted. Prantik, would you like to speak on this sub agenda?
No, not right now.
No, no issues. Shruti and Thesis, would you like to?
So I'll pass this agenda.
Passed off. Okay. Shubham, would you like to?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay, so the speakers are Mr. Dev, Mr. Goffey, Kashvi, Mr. Prakhar, then Shruti is not, and Shubham. I'll start with Mr. Dev. So Dev, please go ahead. You have 5 minutes. And meanwhile, just 1 minute. Meanwhile, delegates, please work on your report. Shubham, if you wish to contribute, Kshitij, can you share the link? I can share the link. 1 minute. Let me do that. 1 minute. I will obviously discuss this report very thoroughly today. So I will actually get on the basics once this session is closed. Then we will get into the informal debate to discuss this, and then we'll pass it. So Shubham, you can also contribute in the report for the last agenda, for the last sub agenda. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Dave, you can begin now. Yes.
Can I begin? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. So I would be talking about the IP recognition and safety policies and how IP laws need to be developed in consonance with space laws in the Indian aspect. Now, the Cabinet Ministry of India on the 24th day of June 2020 made a press release with regards to the space sector. Now, India took a step towards allowing private corporations to set up in the space ecosystem. And with the advancements in technology and the government allowing private corporations, the space sector or the industries ought to boom in the coming years, with the private corporations marking their niche in the sector. So therefore, it is highly imperative for the Space Commission and the judiciary and the legislation to incorporate laws, IP, intellectual property rights, to these private corporations, and these need to be kept in consonance with the entire framework of international space laws. Now, an IP made by a private corporation, the rights of the same shall be accorded with the private corporation and the government only. Now, only the government and the private corporation who is behind the idea, who is the brainchild of the IP, shall be able to use and exploit it. The European Space Agency has made provisions to protect the IPs made by private companies in cases where the government provides funds for the development of the IP. Now, if the innovation or the creation is completely funded by the government, then the IP rights could remain with the organization who is the brainchild of the IP. However, there's a twist in this. The maker of the IP or the organization who has created the IP has to make the IP available at no cost to the government, to the academicians, and to various research organizations, which could open up the key elements to its prototypes. This is done so that IP is available to all for research and other scientific purposes, and it doesn't run simply for the creator to fulfill his commercial interests, as it is a well known aspect that private corporations simply operate in order to incur profits. Now, the law in India needs to be made comprehensively, keeping in mind that excess powers are not granted to private corporations who are venturing into the space ecosystem. These companies could perhaps solely operate for profit purposes, and strict limitations and exceptions with regards to their powers need to be laid down in a law which is robust and formidable. For instance, a private company finds a planet and claims ownership rights over it as a finder's right, and then uses the planet to carry out its own operations in order to earn huge profits. In such a case, the laws need to be robust enough in order to provide enough backing and enough provisions which could curtail such an organization who is taking control over something that it finds in the outer space. The law can be on the similar lines as it is made by the European Space Agency. So even if a private corporation, let's say, finds a planet tomorrow, it should not be simply available for the company to use, but even the government should have the rights to claim over it. However, if private corporation innovates something through its own expertise and through its own technology without any assistance from the government, then in such a case, the IP rights of its innovations could solely lie with the corporation itself, and this would ensure that the government uh, is working properly in consonance with these private players, and these laws need to be made strictly with utmost precision before India allows such companies to start venturing into the space market. Now, the law further needs to protect the innovations made by individual scientists as well. Now, these innovations made by the individual scientists for ISRO could remain as a joint intellectual property of ISRO and the scientist, and no one else should be able to access it and use it to further their own personal agendas. Now, it should be the duty and the responsibility of the lawmaking authorities to act as a formidable watchdog over these aspects. Now, space laws and IP laws are need to be connected to each other, and the domestic laws of the country need to be made, enabling the private corporations in India to act in the right manner and not violate any provisions of international law, thereby staying away from the clutches of the UN and the other international treaty obligations. Now, the US Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act allows or permits the citizens of the United States of America to engage in commercial exploration and exploitation of space resources. Only the United Nations, Luxembourg, and Japan allow its citizens and its companies to mine on the moon and other planets. However, this does not mean that it grants ownership rights to them. Similarly, a law in India needs to be made on a similar lines, which could enable private corporations to have IP protections when it comes to securing their designs, their prototypes, but not exactly granting them ownership rights with regards to the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Dev. Let's go ahead. Missed any point of information or point of order? Okay, Samar, your decision is taken into consideration. Accepted. No point of order so far, no point of information. Therefore, I will go ahead with Mr. Goffey. Mr. Goffey, please take 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Okay. intellectual property is not definitely my field. The only thing that I've seen or noticed in the report that you sent us, the explanation report, is that obviously you stress that there is room for private patent when it comes to developing new tools for space. And I do agree on the fact that obviously private companies will bring lots of things to the exploration of space. But at the same time, as it is mentioned in the report, also most of the laws that are existing are made for states and not for private companies. So yes, there is room because those laws, as it is stated in the report, are pretty flexible. But we have to take into account the fact that if we open the doors to a private company, it will raise lots of legal concern, but also of ethical concern. I would once again stress the fact that all this, and we have to be clear and honest on that, all this is about money, right? It's about making money and having a role on the international arena, right? So we are all here in France, you in India, the US, China. We're all looking at space as a new diplomatic, a playground. So when it comes to this kind of consideration, diplomatic playground or even financial issues or potentialities, you have to know, or you must not, we must not be naive on that. We have to know that legality and ethicality are really low in the priority list. So the point is, it is one thing to state that there is room for a private company to have patents regarding space, the use of space, and it is another to say how will we be able to deal with that? What kind of regulation we will be able to put in place? What kind of safeguard will we be able to create in order not to have those private companies using space in a way that is undesirable? So my concern is obviously, and you've given this example of India working with private company, and lots of countries are doing the same. Obviously, we need private companies, but I do think that it has been stated before, space is a global common, right? And we have to limit the access to space by private company. And I don't think that there is any kind of legal instrument that will be binding enough to make sure that space will not be invaded by private company. At some point, states do have this responsibility to make sure that space is a limited access territory, and that it falls under the control of states. So yes, I would say obviously once again, private companies do have lots of things to bring into that field, but I do believe that it's definitely not a good idea, except to open the doors to potential drifts, to open this access to private company. Thank you.
I must appreciate this point. So you had for 1 minute 40 seconds left. The timer can be stopped now. So I really like the point on corporatism and the issues that extra privatization is also not necessary, but at the same time, regulatory considerations can be nation-centric, and while that is done, it is effective that the way rule of law works must be clearly signified. However, I think I would take one example from what Bogdan said yesterday in the panel, that which was his view. I'm just quoting his view, not exactly, but in a paraphrased sense. So when the moderator asked about the role of GDPR and how is it transforming, can we see some considerations? He actually was in line with a very interesting quotation that, for example, we have a lot of regulatory suggestions on AI, especially from Europe, but some of them are too much cosmetic. So what he said was, okay, fine, you are making reports and doing stuff. You actually had a data protection directive, but now you have GDPR. But GDPR, still you got 9 months for the companies to actually resolve their compliance with GDPR. There will be some compliance issues always. So it is his view, not mine, that GDPR was turned out to be obsolete. But that was actually one aspect of understanding that this is the magic of privatization. When you actually privatize, it's often difficult to control the speed So economic freedom also is connected with the idea of trust and honesty in maintaining the rule of law, because it's inevitable that in information age the state goes back, and then the private companies, NGOs, private actors, individuals, celebrities, all these people go ahead. In fact, international organizations became relevant also due to this, because not just 1945 we had the League of Nations, it did not work. So many things are there, political things, yes, but at the same time, I think that is also a very interesting aspect that with regards to IP. I really appreciate that. So this was my I would say take, nothing else. I would request the next delegate to go ahead. So Kashmi, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yes. So, patent laws in space, they themselves are so complex, considering that now private entities will also be governed by this. This would just make the whole situation more problematic, because, firstly, what the creation of IP, what are the problems that per like right now are persistent with space law? That firstly, one of the problems being that IP requires novelty, non-obviousness, and usefulness for the functionality. And suppose now, for example, a space invention is based on the concept that microgravity was used. Now, considering that this is something that can be done in space, there will be no novelty aspect to it. And that's why maybe it will not pass as a patent. And this would just create a huge gray area for such inventions or for such matters that are developed, because space like developing some inventions do require the space environment. So what about those inventions? Like, can they just be ignored on the grounds that microgravity is not a novel enough issue, a novel enough perspective? Secondly, an important aspect is jurisdiction. Obviously, this has been already, like, USA has already highlighted that this could be an issue, and that's why their patent laws has a particular aspect where the space objects or anything concerned under the jurisdiction or control of the United States shall be considered to be made or sold by them. Now, this is also actually in line with the Article 8 of the Outer Space Treaty that prescribes that states retain jurisdiction and control over the objects that they launch into outer space. So, something like that should definitely be considered by the nations at their respective national laws, that the extraterritorial nature should be highlighted, so that this provides IP in space as a more as an actual enforceable option. Because what happens that a lot of times that even there's a whole international procedure to get a patent, and states do get that patent, and even if they file it, they do get it, but if any wrong is there, then there are still issues about where should they go to remedy such a wrong. So that's why if nations at their own respective jurisdictions have at least a strong hold on the patent laws, not exactly proposing a specific patent law for space, but just their specific patent law should have this extraterritorial nature. That now, even if now when we have to consider private entities in this perspective too, we would at least have a more broader scope to do that, because private entities definitely requires much more regulations, much more specific guidelines, and without a rather strong hold that nations would have over their IP regulations, this would become difficult. Now, secondly, being the point of economic incentives and corporate commercialization, this is also a thing that needs to be kept in mind. That as much as it is difficult to regulate private companies, they are something that are also needed, as repeatedly stated. So, what must be distinctive, that even private entities, if they are carrying on certain initiatives which are for the public good, which are in public interest, now such initiatives should be distinct, and such public matter interest initiatives should be given an incentive in IP laws. And because obviously IP laws for space will be regulated in a much more stricter fashion, because the states would be reluctant to opening such patent rights to private entities, but incentivizing the private entities to working for matters of public interest by providing a more easier structure for the patent law would not only work towards actually helping the private entities for even if they are working something in commercial interest, but along with that do something of public interest, and would also at the same time give them the commercial incentive of having these patent rights. So it has to be a two-way structure. It has to be a structure where the private entities as well as the states benefit, because the whole idea of a private public corporation rests on the structure, and any guidelines or any regulations, however ideal we say, is to control the private sector. But in today's need, we also need that we find solutions or recommendations that are as in their interest as in the interest of the larger good or of the states, that should be more transparent and should work towards such issues. So that would be my position on this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kashri. You had just barely 3 seconds left. Anyways, any point of information or point of order? No. Okay. So, Mr. Prakhar, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Abhivardhan. I would like to start from the point where you left the discussion. Like you were talking about the government and the private companies, as quoted in the yesterday's session. I would like to point out that government are checked. Like if a government policies are against what should have been, it might be removed in the next election. But what about the private companies who are involved in this space exploration? What if they does not comply with the ethics and morality? They might go unchecked because suppose for India there might be only one or two big players who are capable of indulging in the space exploration. So how are they going to be checked? Because there might not be any other alternative. So I would more talk about the safety policies, because IP recognitions have been talked a lot. So the space exploration is a completely different dimension where there is unfamiliar environment, and these are very high risk activities. So a multi-level safety regulations needs to be put in place. Um, the accidents might happen because of human error, might happen because of some sensors or some devices malfunction. So for the human error, we might hold the person accountable, but for the device error, should the device supplier be held accountable? How to what extent he should be held accountable? And similarly, uh, like in the case of Bhopal gas tragedy that happened in India, to what extent and was any person held liable ultimately? In the case of India, Kalpana Chawla died while the space shuttle was landing, and it was mainly due to the defect in a suitcase-sized insulation that broke and damaged while the space shuttle was being launched. So, was this the right idea to send them, and knowing that they might not land safely? So, who could have made this decision? Uh, Moreover, there are health standards as well, because this is mm, very risky environment. Fitness for duty standards, and to what limit the hazards and exposure should be held back. Like in the movie Chernobyl, which many of us might have seen, the mine workers were sent to the mines for the safety of people at large. They were put at risk. So will it be right to send people in space even if it is a risky adventure, uh, without caring about their safety regulations, or maybe without making such a huge investment to 100% ensure that they return safely? So these are the safety concerns, and moreover, who shall be monitor and have surveillance over all these things. Uh, a proposal can be that if a person makes a like if ISRO makes a satellite or a launch vehicle, it would have done everything possible best possible to their capacity to launch the things correctly. But it might happen that maybe NASA or the space unit of Russia, they might be able to find out some problems or maybe some issues regarding their launch. So uh, rather than focusing on individual nations for their self exploration of space, it would be much better if all the nations come together at a global scale and to collaborate and then to launch these missions so that the safety policies are well taken care of, and it is beneficial for the whole humankind maybe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any points of information? You had 15 to 13 seconds left. Yes. No points of information so far. Yes, Samar, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Yes, actually, the Keshvi and Prakarsa have covered the major part, but I want to keep it very short. So, in the IP regime, if we talk about the jurisdiction, suppose if we look at the scenario where in the outer space station, if particular uh, machine or has been created, now the question of jurisdiction issue will came into picture, because if it's a state, then it's all right. What if it is created by private entity in the space? Now the question of jurisdiction will raise that where does which country which hold the jurisdiction, hold the jurisdiction. So in terms of the government, so there's a rule of a flag rule in case of laws of seas, where the flag is the extension of the territory. But does that rule particularly imply in a similar circumstances in space? Suppose on the space shuttle or on the space station which exists in the space has created a machine. So so the patent and trade secret rights, which jurisdiction will it fall under? So that is one of the issue. There are other issue related to, suppose there are two space station in collaboration come together in the space where they met and they created something. So now the question has been raised, where does the jurisdiction lies of such machine regarding the trade secret and where it should get registered? So these are the issues which need to be addressed. What if in the case of any private entity which just launch its own space shuttle? So where does it register? Because there are no particular territory marked in the outer space. So therefore, how would it regulate? Uh, Similarly, the other aspect as well, which Prakhar sir has discussed regarding the security and safety of the astronauts in the space. For example, SpaceX has launched the space tourism. What if the machine that malfunctions in the space? Now, who will have a liability? Suppose a vehicle which has been privately made by SpaceX. So the patent rights, and if that particular shuttle has been made by SpaceX in collaboration with NASA or with another space station, so who will have a liability of such accident? So that should also be like under the outer space treaties and under the moon agreements and other regulation which existed, needs an amendment to regulate such aspect of it, because at present moment we don't have a proper structure to understand the scenario, because this scenario will play an important role in future. So we have to understand all these aspects to for a structural approach. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any point of information towards Somerset or point of order? Nothing? Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Shubham, you are the last speaker for the formal debate for the day. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Oh,
Introduce
yes.
yourself and go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. Uh, uh, if you find the details of the intellectual property in space law, then you will find over the past decades there has been a transition from government to private enterprises conducting space related activities. So, uh, uh, it is anticipated that such as an undertaking will require collaboration between various private and you can say government entities. So, but the way in which IP has been protected on the Earth it, it should be not extended into the outer space due to the requirement of outer space treaty. So, a good example of this is an international space station where each and you can say each and individual nation of the has jurisdiction or control of spacecraft or say component that is responsible for. So this means say patent invention which will be which was exploited in the Japanese section of the ISS, and they will be fall under the Japanese laws, and it will be invention under US section. So, generally, a patent claim protecting a method of producing a goodwill. So, it will be infringed if the third party reforms each step of the method defined by the claim. So, uh, if this is also a further complicated when a part is performed only a patent can be claim method into one jurisdiction and other can be performed from the another jurisdiction of the part of the space law. So if you find the some jurisdictions these are like uh, some are like US infringement and they can include some activities. So outside the jurisdiction if these activities are in infringe activities or can say under the activity, so such these are the spreading method, these are under out of the control. So so government must have to make some initiative regarding the IP under the space law. So if I am giving some example, there are however for a lunar settlement under the control of the multiple jurisdiction and third party might avoid the infringement. So if they perform a part of the method in the settlement under the IP or the or can say under one jurisdiction, so these method and another section which are under not under the out of control. So especially where the patent does not apply to the both both jurisdiction. Uh, so it would be a uh, thank you so much, sir. Uh,
My pleasure. My pleasure. You had 1 minute 40 seconds left.
so
So,
sorry, but it is up to this report only, sir.
no issue. There's no issue with that. You do not need to apologize for this. This is just a part of procedure that we told that the time has elapsed. This much time is left. Nothing else.
Yes, sir.
No issue. There's no issue to apologize for this. Why? Okay. I think we are at the end of the session here. We will say at the end of this particular segment. So, Kshitij, if you can just track Mr. Goffey or Aditi, if you can track Mr. Goffey, that would be great. Meanwhile, we need to discuss this report. So, in order to do it, let us then get into the basics of it, which is the most important. Okay, so Mr. Goffey has already given this message. Okay, accepted. So, let us discuss the report. Okay. So one of the authors is obviously not here, but rest of the authors are. So I will invoke the rest of the authors to uh, uh, come in. I will give a reading, and then what will I do is I will share the same with all of you. Therefore, before we go ahead with that, on behalf of the executive board, we invoke the motion to adjourn the meeting and continue with the session, which means that the assembly shall reconstitute itself and convene. The assembly shall convene at 10:30 a.m. Indian times sharp on October the 3rd. Thereby, the session is adjourned. The public meeting is adjourned, and the motion must be passed. Therefore, the motion is accepted for vote. So, those who are in favor of the motion, please vote aye. Those who are not, please vote noes. Thank you. Everybody has to vote, please. Four is to 0. 4 is to 0 is not a majority. 5 is to 0. I request everybody to vote, please. 5, 6. Okay. Majority passed. So now this report has to be voted to be passed. Considerably, Mr. Goffey shall have an affirmative vote, so his affirmative vote is added. It is 1:0. But rest of it, we'll see how we can go ahead with it. Therefore, the recording is stopped and the session is adjourned. We shall now go ahead with the informal debate. Thank you. Please stay in this call. We need to discuss the report further.